What do you do when your own daughter stands at the head of her table, points at you in front of friends, and says you are just stress that needs to leave? How do you walk out with nothing but a grocery bag and still keep your dignity when everyone thinks you are a broke, tired old man who has nowhere to go? And what happens when the same people discover that, on the other side of town, you were never the dependent burden they imagined, but the quiet owner of the roof over their heads and the future they took for granted? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Mark Lawson, and the night my daughter told me I was her stress started like any other tired weekday in their suburban house. I woke up in the small guest room at the end of the hallway, the one that used to be a storage space before they cleared it out and pushed a narrow bed against the wall. There was just enough space for a small dresser, a folding chair, and a hook on the door for my jacket. My few shirts hung in a crooked line, and the rest of my life fit into 2 plastic bins under the bed. When I swung my feet onto the cool floor that morning, I told myself the same thing I had been telling myself for months, that I was lucky to have a roof over my head and to be near my grandson, even if I did not always feel like part of the home. I shuffled down the hallway and passed by the open door of the master bedroom. I could see the edge of their big bed, the glow of Chloe's phone screen as she scrolled in the early light, and a pile of clothes on a chair. Dylan's gym bag lay near the door, already packed. Now, I did not step inside or knock. I just went to the kitchen and started coffee, because that was what I did now. The kitchen looked like something out of a catalog, with white cabinets, a big island, and shiny appliances that beeped if you pressed the wrong button. I still preferred older stoves with real knobs, but I had learned how to work this one. I put a pan on the burner, cracked a few eggs, and started breakfast. Making food was one of the ways I felt useful, even if nobody really said anything about it. When Chloe walked in, already dressed in a neat blouse and jeans for her marketing job, she gave me a quick nod. She said she had an early meeting and that she was stressed about a campaign, her words tumbling out before coffee. I told her that I would handle Noah's school drop-off and take care of dinner, like always. She just said that she appreciated it, but her tone sounded more tired than grateful. Dylan came in after her, wearing his branded hoodie and leggings, smelling like cologne and energy drink. He slapped his phone on the counter and started talking about a new client for his fitness app, saying he was sure this one would finally go viral. He glanced at the scrambled eggs and toast on the table and joked that Grandpa was still making old-school food instead of smoothies. But he sat down and ate anyway. He did not ask who paid for the groceries or who cleaned the pan. I had my own small pension money and I used it often at the supermarket, but in their heads I think food just appeared. Noah padded in last, half awake, his hair sticking up in all directions. His face brightened when he saw me. He climbed into my lap and started telling me about a drawing he wanted to make for school, something about buses and spaceships mixed together. I listened carefully, the way I always did, and promised that we would work on it that afternoon after homework. When it was time to go, I walked him to the car, made sure his jacket was zipped, and watched as Chloe drove him to school, one hand on the wheel, one hand still sending a voice note to a colleague. After they left, the house was quiet. I washed the dishes, wiped down the counters, and picked up a few stray toys in the living room. The TV still showed the paused screen of some kids' show. I turned it off and looked around. It was a beautiful house, bigger than anything I ever grew up in, with high ceilings and big windows. I remembered how proud I had felt when Chloe first called to say they had been approved for the mortgage, how I went with them to the bank to sit in on the meeting. Back then, I thought they saw me as part of their foundation, not as extra weight. Somewhere between that day and this morning, I had turned into something else in their minds. I walked to the small entryway where I kept my shoes and picked up my worn jacket. It still smelled a little like oil and dust from my years at the bus depot. Those years seemed far away inside this neat suburban box. I checked my wallet and saw there was still enough cash to buy what we needed for dinner, so I decided to go to the supermarket. It was a small thing, but it made me feel useful. At the store, I moved slowly through the aisles, choosing potatoes, chicken, vegetables, and a box of cereal Noah liked. I did not buy anything fancy, just basic food that could stretch across a couple of meals. At the checkout line, I counted my cash and felt that familiar sting when the total climbed higher than I expected. But I paid without saying a word. The cashier bagged everything and thanked me by name, because by now I was one of the regulars. When I got back to the house, I carried the bags into the kitchen and started preparing a stew that could simmer all afternoon. As I chopped onions and carrots, my mind drifted back over the last year. It had started with my fall at the depot. I had slipped on a slick patch of oil, hit my shoulder, and cracked a rib. The doctor told me that my body needed more rest than it used to. The company offered a small early retirement package, and for the first time in 40 years, I was not working on engines every day. Chloe had insisted that I move in with her for a while, saying she did not want me alone in my old place after the accident. I agreed, thinking it would be temporary and grateful that she still cared. It felt like a circle closing in a gentle way. I would help with her son, and she would help me while I healed. But healing took longer than we thought, and the mood in the house slowly shifted. At first, Chloe seemed glad to have an extra pair of hands. I did school runs, fixed broken hinges, changed light bulbs. Dylan said it was great to have someone around who could do things while they worked. Over time, though, their language changed. Chloe started to sigh when I sat in the living room during her video calls, even if I stayed silent. She made comments about needing her own space and worrying what her friends would think when they saw 3 generations under one roof. Dylan joked more loudly about having a roommate and said he could not wait until his app took off so they could upgrade to a house without extra responsibilities. None of it was said straight to my face in one big moment. It was more like steady dripping. The afternoon slipped by in quiet work. I finished the stew, peeled some potatoes, and set the table with simple plates and glasses. I liked doing these things. They gave my day shape. When Noah came home from school, we sat at the kitchen table to do homework together. He told me that his teacher had asked the class who they lived with, and he had said that he lived with Mom, Dad, and Grandpa. He said some kids had laughed and that one boy had asked if Grandpa was sick and could not live alone. Noah said he told them he did not know. Then he asked me directly if I could live by myself or if I needed help. I told him that I was fine, that I had lived on my own for many years, and that right now I was just helping his mom. He looked thoughtful and went back to his spelling words, but the question stayed in my chest like a stone. By early evening, the house filled with different sounds. Music from the living room, the hairdryer in the bathroom, Noah's footsteps running up and down the hallway. Chloe told me there would be people joining for dinner, some friends from her work, and some people from Dylan's gym. She said it was a little thing, but that she wanted everything to be nice and calm. I said I would stay out of the way if that made her feel better, but she told me I should just act normal and not worry. I took that as a polite way of telling me to be useful, but quiet. The guests arrived in waves, bringing bottles of wine and loud compliments about the house. Chloe moved around the room, smiling wide, making sure everything looked perfect. Dylan told stories about his brand, about deals that were almost closed, and about the stress of supporting a family in the modern world. I stayed mostly near the kitchen, carrying dishes in and out, making sure the stew stayed warm and the plates were filled. A couple of guests asked politely if I was visiting. I said that I was staying with my daughter for a while, and they nodded in that way people do when they think they understand. When we all finally sat at the long dining table, wine poured and plates full, the conversation turned to stress. One woman from Chloe's office said she was exhausted from juggling work and kids. Another man from the gym complained that his parents kept calling him about small things. The talk circled the same theme, how they were all under pressure. Dylan leaned back, put an arm around Chloe's chair, and said that nobody understood how stressed his wife was, that she had to manage a demanding job, a child, and extra family responsibilities. He used a tone that sounded half teasing, half serious. Someone laughed and said that at least they had help around the house, nodding slightly toward me. Chloe's face tightened. I saw the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped her glass. She started listing her tasks out loud, almost like she was reading from a script in her head. She said she was always worrying about money, about Dylan's projects, about her performance at work, about keeping the house nice, about being a good mother. Then she mentioned, in a strained voice, that she was also responsible for an aging parent who could not live on his own and who added to her mental load. The room fell a little quiet. Everyone looked at her with sympathetic eyes. I felt the words hit me like a door slamming even before she finished. She took a breath and said that sometimes she felt like if one piece fell, everything would collapse, and that the biggest piece of stress in her life was me. She did not say it like a cruel joke. She said it like a confession. She said she wished sometimes that I would just leave, because then maybe she could breathe. The phrase she used was that I was her stress, and that if I wanted to help, I should stop being there. For a second, nobody moved. Forks hung in midair. I saw a couple of guests glance at their plates, not wanting to look at me. Dylan shifted uncomfortably, but did not say anything to soften her words. My chest felt hollow, like someone had cut a piece out, but my voice stayed steady. I did not argue with her. I did not ask her to take it back. I just set my napkin down next to my plate, stood up slowly, and looked at my grandson. His eyes were wide, confused. I told him softly that I would talk to him later. Then I walked down the hallway to the guest room. In the small room, it did not take long to gather my things. I opened the closet and took 2 shirts, a sweater, and my jacket. I pulled my old toiletry bag from the drawer, along with my medications and a few personal items. I slid my folded clothes into a grocery bag that was lying on the floor, the same kind I used at the store. It felt strange to see my life reduced to what could fit inside that thin plastic, but it also felt clean in a way. No drawers to empty, no shelves to clear. Just a few things. Easy to carry. When I walked back through the hallway, the voices at the table had dropped to a low murmur. Chloe stared at her plate, her cheeks pale. I did not stop. I stepped into the entryway, put on my jacket, and opened the front door. The air outside was cooler than I expected, carrying the smell of cut grass and distant traffic. I walked down the path to the sidewalk with the grocery bag in my hand, my back straight, my step slow but steady. I did not slam the door, I did not shout. I just left. At the end of the driveway, I paused for a moment and took my phone from my pocket to check the time and see if there were any missed calls. The screen lit up, and just then, as if the world itself wanted to remind me of something I had almost forgotten, a small calendar reminder slid across the top. It was for early the next morning, and it said in simple words that I had a meeting at the cafe with Rita. The phone buzzed softly in my hand, and the light from the screen shone on the grocery bag at my feet as I stood there in the dark, realizing that walking away from that house did not mean I had nowhere to go. When I left my daughter's house that night with the grocery bag in my hand, I did not go straight to the cafe. I walked to the bus stop first and sat on the metal bench, letting the cool air settle me. The streetlights threw long shadows across the pavement, and cars hissed by in small streams. I could still hear Chloe's voice in my head, saying that I was her stress and that she wished I would just leave. The words did not fit with the little girl I remembered, the one who used to wait for me at the window of our old apartment, jumping up and down when she saw my bus turn the corner. My hands rested on the handle of the grocery bag, and I realized I needed to go back through those years in my head, the same way I would walk through an old bus engine, piece by piece, to figure out where the noise was really coming from. I spent most of my working life at the city bus depot. My job was simple in description and hard in practice. I checked engines, changed parts, listened for strange sounds in the heavy breathing of machines that carried people across town every day. When Chloe's mother got sick and then passed away, I went from being half of a team to being the only parent in the house. I remember those years as a blur of early mornings and late nights. I would get up before the sun, make Chloe a simple breakfast, walk her to school, then go to the depot. After my shift, I would pick her up from the after-school program, help with homework, and sometimes fall asleep in a chair with a repair manual open on my chest. We did not have much, but we had our routines and a small 2-room apartment that held our lives together. Back then, Chloe did not care about the kind of clothes I wore or the oil under my nails. She loved riding buses because she said they smelled like me. When she was little, she would climb onto my lap and pretend to steer, making soft engine noises with her mouth. On weekends, we would walk to the small cafe on the corner, the one that always smelled like fresh bread and coffee. The owner, a woman named Rita, treated us like family. She would slip an extra cookie onto Chloe's plate and ask me about work. When the previous landlord hinted that he wanted to sell the building, I listened. It took years, but little by little, I put aside money. After overtime shifts and double routes, after saying no to things I wanted, I finally scraped together enough to help Rita make an offer. We did not buy any fancy tower. We bought a tired strip of old storefronts with a cafe on the end. For us, it felt like a castle. The day we signed the papers, I remember telling Chloe, who was then a teenager, that this little place might help her one day. I said that owning even a small patch of land in the city meant she would always have something under her feet that could not be taken easily. She nodded politely back then, but she had her own dreams forming. She wanted something bigger than a place that smelled like coffee and bread. She liked her phone, her fashion magazines, the idea of offices with glass walls. I understood that. Kids always want more than what they grew up with. I did not blame her for that. Time moved on. The cafe stayed steady, the rent from the other small shops came in each month, and my work at the depot continued until my body started to complain. The fall that changed everything was not dramatic. There was no loud crash, no screaming. I slipped on a small patch of oil near the back of the depot when I was carrying a toolbox. My feet flew out from under me and I hit the ground hard. My shoulder and rib took most of the impact. At first, I tried to laugh it off, the way older men do. I told the guys I was fine. But by evening my chest hurt with every breath, and I could not lift my arm. The doctor said I had cracked a rib and strained my shoulder. He told me I needed rest, real rest, not a couple of quiet weekends. The company doctor looked at my years of service and my age and gently suggested early retirement. When Chloe heard about the fall, she came to my apartment with tears in her eyes. She said she did not want me climbing stairs to the loft above the cafe while I healed, that she worried I might fall again and nobody would be there. She insisted that I move in with her for a while, just until I got stronger. I resisted at first. I liked my little place. I liked hearing the cafe downstairs open in the morning, but I could see she needed to feel like she was protecting me, so I agreed. We carried a few bags to her car, locked my old door, and drove to the suburbs where the houses all looked like they had been cut from the same mold. At first, living with Chloe and her family felt like a blessing. Noah was still small then, full of questions and energy. He would crawl onto my lap while I watched old shows and ask me about buses and engines. Chloe seemed relieved to have help with childcare. I cooked, fixed leaky faucets, and did school pickups. Dylan said more than once that it was amazing to have built-in support, so they could focus on their careers. I told myself that this was my chance to give back, that after all the years of raising Chloe alone, I could now make her adult life easier. But something shifted slowly, almost too slowly to notice at first. Chloe's job changed, and soon she was doing marketing for a company that loved social media and branding. She started posting more online, taking pictures of the house, of carefully arranged dinners, of holidays staged for the camera. I was usually just out of frame, washing dishes or wiping a counter. Dylan quit his stable job to work on his fitness app full-time. He filmed videos in the living room and turned the garage into a studio. The money coming in became less predictable, and Chloe's shoulders seemed to carry more weight. Little comments started to slip into their speech. Dylan joked in front of friends that they were the sandwich generation and that having a child and a live-in parent was like running a small hotel. Chloe laughed, but her eyes did not. In private, she would sigh deeply when I forgot to push a chair back in exactly the right way or when I left my work shoes near the door. She started to worry about how it looked when her colleagues dropped by and saw me sitting at the kitchen table reading an actual newspaper instead of staring at a screen. She never said I embarrassed her in those words, but she did say more than once that she wished the house felt more modern and less like a place from my childhood. The turning point was probably when Chloe and Dylan bought their house. They had found a nice place in a new development, a house with big windows and an open-plan kitchen. The bank had given them a mortgage that, on paper, stretched them thin. I went with them to the meeting as moral support. The loan officer looked at the numbers, then at my steady work history and property income. He suggested that if I co-signed and included my income and assets, the terms would be much better. I wanted Chloe to have a stable home, so I agreed. I did not see it then as giving away power. I saw it as backing my child, the same way I had backed up buses for years, standing behind them when they pulled out of the garage. We moved into the house together, and at first it felt like a fresh start. But as months turned into a year, the language in the house shifted more. When Dylan wanted a new camera for his videos, he would say that we needed to invest. When Chloe felt tired, she would look at the bills and say she was carrying everyone on her shoulders. I started to hear myself described as part of her load instead of part of her support. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that stress made people say things they did not fully mean. There were small moments that should have warned me. Once, I heard Chloe on a call with a friend from work. She thought I was outside, but I was in the hallway. She said that she loved her dad, but that having him live with them made her feel like she was stuck in a life that was not as polished as her colleagues. She said she worried people would think they were behind, still in that stage where parents could not live alone. She said she felt guilty thinking that way, but her voice sounded more frustrated than guilty. I stood in the hallway for a minute, my hand resting on the wall, and then I quietly walked outside to give her space to finish. Another time, at the park, Noah sat next to me on a bench and watched other kids play. He told me that some boy at school had said that only poor families had all 3 generations in one house. Noah asked if that was true. I told him that families live in all kinds of ways and that there is no shame in sharing a roof. He seemed to accept that, but then he asked if I would always live with them or if I would ever live in my own place again. I asked why he was wondering. He said he had heard his mom say she would breathe easier when she had her own space back. That was the first time I felt a real crack in the floor under my feet. Looking back, I can see how Chloe felt squeezed from all sides. She worked long hours, worried about Dylan's inconsistent income, tried to be a good mother, and carried her own childhood memories of me coming home tired and worn out. To her, I think having me in the house again made her feel like she had never really moved on. Instead of seeing my presence as support, she saw it as proof that things had not turned out as shiny as she hoped. The part that hurt was not her stress. I understood stress. It was watching her translate that stress into a story where I was the main problem. By the time that dinner night arrived, that story had hardened inside her. She saw me as the extra noise in her life, the old piece of furniture she could not throw away without feeling guilty. When her friends talked about therapy and boundaries, she started to use those words too. She said that she needed clear emotional lines, that she had to protect her mental health, and that sometimes family could be toxic without meaning to. When she finally stood up at the table and said I was her stress and that if I wanted to help I should leave, I knew those words did not come from nowhere. They had been forming for a long time, fueled by unspoken shame and small resentments. Still, knowing the path does not make the fall easier. Sitting at the bus stop that night, grocery bag at my feet, I thought of all the times I had chosen the harder route so Chloe could have the easier one. I thought about saying yes at the bank, about leaving my comfortable little loft above the cafe, about bending my routines to fit theirs. I wondered if I had made it too easy for her to forget that I had a life before this house. My phone buzzed again in my hand, and this time it was not a calendar reminder. A short message from a familiar number slid onto the screen. It was from Rita, and it said that the coffee machine at the cafe was making a strange noise again, and that people were already asking when I would be back to sort everything out like always. I read Rita's message twice on the flickering screen, the words about the coffee machine making a strange noise and people asking when I would be back to sort things out. It was a simple text, but it felt like someone had just opened a door behind me that I had forgotten was there. I looked down the road in the direction of my daughter's house and then in the other direction, toward the old neighborhood. The bus that arrived next was heading downtown. I stood up, tightened my grip on the grocery bag, and stepped on. The ride across town felt like moving between two different lives. The houses thinned out, the streets grew older, and the sharp edges of the suburb faded into the familiar bricks and narrow sidewalks I had walked for years. When the bus door hissed open near the strip of stores I knew so well, I stepped off into the softer light of the old block and felt my shoulders loosen slightly for the first time that day. The cafe sat on the corner of the strip mall, its windows warm and hazy with steam. Next to it were a laundromat, a small convenience store, a barber shop, and a locksmith. The sign above the cafe door was simple, just the name in plain letters, but seeing it always gave me the same feeling I used to get watching a bus leave the depot on time. Something working the way it should. I walked inside, and the smell of coffee and baked bread wrapped around me like an old jacket. A couple of regulars looked up from their tables and called out my name. Not sir, not old man, just Mark. One of them joked that the coffee had been behaving badly without me, and another asked if I had finally escaped the quiet prison out in the suburbs. I smiled and shook my head, but did not offer details. I just said I was back to check on things. Rita stood behind the counter with her sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back, eyes tired in the way people's eyes get when they care too much. When she saw me, she let out a long breath she had probably been holding all week. She wiped her hands on a towel and came around the counter to hug me. She said she had been worried and that the machine was making a strange hiss sometimes, but that everyone was more concerned about whether I was all right. I told her I was fine, that I had needed some time with family, but that I felt like myself again now that I was here. She gave me a look that said she understood more than I wanted to say out loud. We went to the back, where the big coffee machine sat against the wall like a metal animal. I listened to it whir and rattle, adjusted a few knobs, and checked a filter that had not been seated right. Within minutes, the sound smoothed out. It was a small fix, but the staff clapped anyway, half teasing, half grateful. I wiped my hands and looked around at the crowded little room with its scuffed floors and mismatched chairs. In my daughter's world, this place would probably look old and unimpressive. In this world, it was a steady heart that had kept beating through hard times. After a while, Rita asked if I wanted to go upstairs and rest. She said I looked like I had not slept well. I nodded and climbed the narrow back stairs to the loft above the cafe. The key turned in the lock with the same familiar resistance. When I pushed the door open, the small room greeted me with the quiet hum of the fridge and the soft light from a single window. The loft was not large, just a bed, a small table, a dresser, and a bookshelf. But it was mine. The bedspread was still the same faded blue. The mug on the table still had a stain from my last cup of tea before I left. Nothing about this space said burden. It said home. I set the grocery bag on the table and sat down on the edge of the bed. It struck me that I had allowed Chloe to believe that I had nowhere else to go when I moved in with her. In truth, I had a safe place above the cafe and steady income from the strip mall. I chose to stay with her because I thought she needed me, not because I was helpless. Somewhere along the way, that choice had turned into a story where I could not live alone. I had gone along with it because correcting her would have meant confronting a harder truth about how she saw me and how I saw myself. After a short rest, I went back down to the cafe and into the small back office. It was not much, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and an old computer. But this was where the bones of my secret life lived. On the shelves sat rows of binders and folders, each labeled in my handwriting: rent records, maintenance logs, loan documents. Among them was a plain folder with a label that caught my eye the way a loose bolt catches a mechanic's hand. It said, Reed House, Co-Ownership and Loan. The edges of the folder were slightly worn from being handled before, but it was closed and resting neatly in place. I did not pull it out. Not yet. Just knowing it was there was enough to remind me of what it meant. Years ago, when Chloe and Dylan had struggled to qualify for their house, the bank had asked to see proof of my assets and income. The strip mall and cafe had given them comfort. We had signed papers that made me co-owner and guarantor. At the time, it felt like a father stepping in to give his kid a piece of earth to stand on. Now, when I thought about Chloe saying I could not live on my own and Dylan acting like he was carrying me, the folder took on a new weight. It was quiet, but it was not powerless. Rita came into the office and leaned against the doorframe. She asked how things really were with Chloe and Dylan. I told her about the dinner, about the sentence that had sliced the night in half, about walking out with only a grocery bag. I did not dramatize it. I just said that my own daughter had looked at me and seen stress, not support. Rita frowned and shook her head. She said that sometimes people who climb one step up forget who held the ladder. She reminded me that in this neighborhood, people knew me as someone who paid rent reductions during rough months, who fixed broken pipes at midnight, who never raised prices without talking to tenants first. Her words washed over me slowly. In the suburb, I was the extra noise at the table. Here, I was part of the reason the lights stayed on. She asked if Chloe knew about my ownership in the strip mall and the cafe. I said she knew in theory, but that I had never really explained it. To her, it was just Dad's little coffee place, not a structure that helped support the very home she now said I was too weak to leave. Rita looked at me for a long moment and asked one simple question. She asked whether keeping my life quiet had started to harm me instead of helping anyone. I did not answer right away. Later that day, after some time at the cafe, I walked a few blocks to a small, older gym that still smelled like real sweat and metal. It was nothing like the bright studio where Dylan filmed his content, but they had a TV on the wall in the corner. A few younger guys were watching videos on their phones and casting them to the screen. I recognized Dylan's voice before I saw his face. He was in the middle of a clip, standing in his studio, talking into the camera about modern independence and the need to set boundaries with older generations who drain your energy and your bank account. He talked about being brave enough to say no to relatives who treat your home like a retirement plan. The comments on the video were full of people calling him brave and relatable. One of the guys at the gym laughed and said that this trainer really spoke the truth. He made a joke about old boomers on couches. I stood in the back, listening. Dylan did not mention my name, but he did not have to. I could hear my life in every line. The same man who needed my signature to get his house and my quiet money to steady his business was now publicly building a persona on the idea that he had cut off dead weight. I felt a sharp heat in my chest, not wild anger, but something clearer. He was not just ungrateful. He was rewriting history in front of strangers. I left the gym and walked back toward the strip mall. As I passed by the locksmith shop and the barber shop, people greeted me like they always did. Mrs. Patel, who ran the little convenience store, came out to the sidewalk and asked why she had not seen me for a while. I told her I had been helping family and that I might have overdone it. She nodded and said that family can pull you in two directions at once, especially when money and pride get mixed in. She patted my arm and said that this block would always see me as the man who saved the cafe from closing and who fixed her leaky roof for free when the landlord before me did not care. As the sun started to sink, I went back up to the loft and sat at the table. I took my phone from my pocket and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I had not touched in a while. It was Janet, the lawyer who had helped me set up some of the agreements years ago. I did not call her that night. I just looked at the name and remembered the last time I had sat in her office going over documents in calm, precise language. Back then, I had wanted to make sure Chloe would always have something solid, no matter who she married or what job she took. I had thought of myself as a man building a safe floor under his family. I had not imagined I would live long enough to watch them dance on it while talking about me like I was a broken chair in the corner. In that small room above the cafe, with the murmur of voices drifting up from below, something inside me shifted. It was not a dramatic moment. No music, no shouting, just a quiet realization settling into place. I understood that by hiding my strength and downplaying my role, I had allowed others to believe I was weak and disposable. I had made it easy for them to forget that their house and business were partly anchored by the same hands they now pushed away. I told myself that loving my daughter did not mean agreeing to vanish from my own story. I stood up and walked back down to the office. The light over the desk cast a yellow circle onto the shelves. The folder labeled Reed House, Co-Ownership and Loan seemed to lean forward, its edge a little farther out than before, as if the building itself was nudging it. As I reached for a pen on the desk, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a missed call notification from a number I recognized even before the name appeared. It was Janet's office. The next morning, I woke up in the loft with the kind of clear headache that comes after you finally admit something to yourself. Light came in through the small window, catching dust in the air, and the smell of coffee drifted up from the cafe below. For a moment, I lay still and listened to the sounds of cups clinking and chairs scraping. Down there, I was just Mark, the guy who helped keep the place running. Out in the suburbs, I was the stress my daughter wanted to remove. Lying between those two truths, I knew I could not go back to pretending that the second one was the only story that counted. I got up, washed my face, and made a simple decision. I would stop acting like I had no tools. I would find out exactly what I had built on paper, not just in memory, and then I would decide what to do with it. After coffee with Rita and a short walk around the block to calm my nerves, I called Janet's office. The receptionist recognized my name and asked if everything was all right. I said that I needed to review some older documents and that there had been changes in my living situation. She checked Janet's schedule and said there was an opening that afternoon. I agreed without overthinking it. Hanging up, I felt the same mix of dread and relief I used to feel when I walked into a supervisor's office after a bad inspection report. The facts were already there. Meeting did not create them. It just forced you to look at them. Janet's office was on the third floor of a modest building downtown, far from the glass towers Chloe liked to admire. The waiting room was quiet, with a small plant in the corner and a shelf of worn magazines. When Janet came out, she greeted me with the same calm, steady manner she had the last time we worked together. In her office, she asked what had brought me back, and I told her in simple terms. I explained that I had moved in with my daughter after an injury, that I had helped with her house and her husband's business, and that now she saw me as a burden to be removed. I did not repeat every word from the dinner, but I told her enough. She listened without rushing me, then turned to her computer and file cabinets. She pulled out folders with my name on them, including the one tied to the strip mall and the one for Chloe and Dylan's house. She spread a few key pages on the desk and walked me through them, not like I was a fool, but like I was a man who deserved to understand exactly what he had signed. She reminded me that the deed for the suburban house listed me as co-owner alongside Chloe and Dylan, and that the mortgage had been approved based on all three of our incomes and assets. She also reminded me there were additional papers separate from the bank where I had documented money I had lent to Dylan's business as private support, with clear terms for what would happen if the business could not hold its weight. Hearing her describe it all in plain language made my stomach tighten. I had not forgotten signing those papers, but I had pushed the details into a back corner of my mind. She asked gently why I had done that. I told her that at the time, I saw the documents as safety nets, not tools. I wanted to make sure Chloe would never lose her home because of a bad month or a slow year. I had told myself that as long as they were trying, I would hold the rope from my side. Janet nodded and said that was understandable, but she added that ropes can turn into chains if you are the only one pulling. She asked how Chloe and Dylan talked about me now. I told her about being called stress, about being described to friends as an extra responsibility, about Dylan's public complaints about supporting an older relative. Janet's expression did not change much, but I could see the way she filed those details in her mind. She reminded me that being co-owner and guarantor was not just a favor. It was a legal position. She said that if I no longer wanted to be tied in the same way, there were options. Some involved asking the others to refinance in their own names. Some involved setting conditions for continued support. Others involved stepping back entirely if they refused to treat me with basic respect. She did not tell me what to do. She just laid out the structure, the way I used to lay out tools on a bench before starting a repair. I told her I did not want revenge that broke my daughter's life apart. I said I was not interested in seeing her on the street or watching my grandson suffer because of adult choices. What I wanted was to stop being cast as a helpless burden when, on paper, I was one of the main supports. Janet said that was reasonable. She suggested that before making any decisions, I should also speak with the bank that held the mortgage and the business credit, just to understand how my role looked from their side. She offered to send over summary notes of our meeting and to be available if I chose to make changes later. When I left her office, I carried no new documents in my hand. But inside my head, things had shifted. I no longer saw myself as someone living on borrowed kindness. I saw myself as someone who had quietly lent out more strength than he admitted. From there, I walked to the community bank where I had first sat with Chloe and Dylan for their house loan. The building was smaller than the big national banks, but more solid in a way. Inside, the air was cool and still, and I could hear the quiet tapping of keyboards. I asked the receptionist if I could speak with Tony, the loan officer who had handled our file. She checked his schedule and said he was free for a few minutes. He came out and greeted me with a firm handshake, asking how the family was and how the cafe was doing. I told him the cafe and strip mall were steady, but that I had some questions about my role in my daughter's mortgage and my son-in-law's business credit. In his office, I sat in the same chair I had occupied years before. Back then, I had watched Chloe's excitement as numbers appeared on the screen. Today, I watched Tony pull up the loan documents with a more careful eye. He confirmed in that neutral bank tone that the mortgage had been underwritten with me as a co-borrower and co-owner, and that my property income and savings had been major factors in the approval and the favorable terms. He also confirmed that Dylan's business had a small line of credit on file, supported in part by a personal guarantee I had signed and by notes about my stable financial position. I asked him what would happen if I ever decided that I could not continue in the same way. I made sure to say that I was not asking to suddenly rip the ground out from under anyone, but that I wanted to know what options existed if I felt my role was being misused. Tony said that, generally speaking, banks can review credit arrangements when a major guarantor steps back or when financial reality does not match what is on file. He said that if a guarantor wanted to withdraw support going forward, the bank might require the remaining borrowers to refinance, adjust terms, or bring in additional security. He added that any changes should be handled carefully and in writing, not through heated family arguments. He asked, in a gentle way, if there was trouble at home. I answered honestly and said that my daughter seemed to see me as an anchor dragging her down, even though my name and history had held up half her house. He did not comment on the family part. He just said that it was his job to deal in facts and that the facts were simple. On paper, I was not a dependent, I was a pillar. He said that if I ever wanted to formalize any change, I should come back or have my lawyer contact him. When I left the bank, I felt like I had just walked a full lap around a building I had helped construct, finally looking at all its sides. Back at the cafe, Rita pulled me into a quick meeting in the back room to go over the latest numbers. The cafe was doing all right, not rich but steady, and the rent from the other units covered more than the mortgage on the strip mall. She showed me the ledger, the same one we had built together over years of careful work. Looking at those columns of figures, I thought about how different my two worlds were. In one, I was someone whose presence was written into the structure, whose name was attached to real numbers. In the other, I was an invisible line in my daughter's mind, spoken of as a problem, not a partner. Later that week, I went to the park again, this time by habit more than plan. It felt wrong not to see Noah, even if the situation at home was tense. As if the universe sensed that, Chloe sent a short message asking if I could meet them at the park for an hour so Noah could say hello. She wrote that she did not have time for a long talk, but thought it would be good for him. I agreed. When they arrived, Noah ran ahead and hugged me tightly around the waist, pressing his face into my jacket. Chloe trailed behind, looking tired and guarded. We sat on a bench while Noah played nearby. Chloe spoke in a low voice, saying she was sorry for how things had come out at the dinner. She said she had been under a lot of pressure and that the words had slipped out before she could soften them. She also said that she still felt overwhelmed and that having me in the house made her feel like she had never fully grown up. I listened and did not interrupt. I told her that I understood stress, but that I was not going to live in a place where I was spoken of as a weight instead of a person. I did not mention deeds or loans or guarantees. I just said that I would stay in my own place for now and that we could see each other outside of that house. She looked hurt, but also relieved, as if one piece of her puzzle had been moved into a clearer position. As we watched Noah climb the slide, he shouted back that he wanted Grandpa to come to dinner again soon and sit at the table like before. Chloe glanced at me, and I could see the conflict in her face. She told me quietly that Dylan had big news about a potential partnership for his business and that they were planning a family dinner soon where he wanted to share it. She said that if I felt up to it, I could come, and that maybe it would be a chance to reset things. I heard the word reset and thought about machines that stall when someone tries to restart them without fixing the underlying problem. That evening, back in the loft, I sat at the small table with a notepad and wrote down everything that had happened in the last 2 days. Meeting with Janet, talking to Tony, the park talk with Chloe. I listed facts, not emotions, the way I used to list parts needed for a repair. When I finished, I looked at the page and saw a simple pattern. I had legal and financial ties that kept their house and business steady. They had emotional stories that painted me as a load. So far, only one side of that picture had been allowed in the open. I put down the pen and reached for my phone to check the time. Just then, a new message buzzed at the top of the screen. It was from the family group chat that Chloe used for invitations. The text said they were planning a Sunday dinner at the house, that Dylan wanted to celebrate a big partnership announcement, and that they hoped everyone would come. I stared at the words for a long moment, feeling the old pain of that dining table, and then the newer weight of the folders and conversations I now carried in my head. The date on the screen fixed itself in my mind like a circled mark on a calendar. In the days after I got the message about Sunday dinner, I moved through my routines differently. It felt like I was walking with a toolbox I had finally opened, even if I had not picked up every tool yet. I went downstairs each morning, helped Rita check the cafe numbers, talked to tenants about small repairs, and then went back upstairs to my loft to sit at the table with my notebook. I wrote down dates next to each fact so I could see the story in order, not in the messy swirl of memory. This happened at the depot. This happened at the bank. This happened at the dinner where Chloe called me her stress. This happened at Janet's office. It was the same way I used to track problems with a bus line, marking each breakdown to see if there was a pattern. The pattern here was simple. I had been acting like a man who needed permission to exist, while the paperwork in drawers and on screens said I was one of the reasons those same people could stand where they stood. I made another appointment with Janet, this time by choice, not just to react. When I sat down in her office again, she asked if I had thought about what we had discussed. I told her that I had decided on a few things. I said that I did not want to rip support away in a way that would punish Noah, but that I did want my life and work to stop being treated as invisible. I said that if my daughter and her husband insisted on seeing me as a stress, then they should at least do it from a position where they were not quietly leaning on my back. Janet nodded and took out a fresh pad. She spoke in calm, plain phrases about updating my will, about adjusting certain agreements so they better reflected what I was willing to carry, and about setting conditions for ongoing support that did not leave me voiceless. I did not need to know every legal term she used. I just needed to understand the shape. The shape was this. What I had built could be directed toward people and places that respected it, not just to the loudest voices in the room. She prepared some papers and placed them on the desk between us. I saw my name in print on the top page, saw a few familiar words, saw references to my grandson and to the properties I owned. I did not read every line while I sat there. I trusted the woman who had helped me before, and I trusted the calm decision I had already made. I signed where she indicated, my hand steady. The pen moved across the paper in slow, deliberate strokes, each one a small statement that I was not just an old man someone had to carry. When we were done, she said that these steps would not immediately change my daughter's mind or my son-in-law's pride, but they would change the ground under their feet if they kept pretending I was not part of their story. She also said that, if needed, she could talk to the bank in clear terms, but only when I was ready for that. Leaving her office, I walked to the bank again, not to demand anything, but to clarify my position. Tony greeted me and asked how things were going. I told him that I had updated some personal arrangements with my lawyer and that I wanted the bank to be aware that my willingness to stand as a silent support for certain accounts had limits. I said that I was not withdrawing everything that day, but that I wanted it noted that ongoing guarantees from me would need to be discussed and renewed, not just assumed. He said that was fair, that banks liked clarity more than confusion. He made a note in my file and said that, if any changes became formal, they would deal with them as policy required. There was no drama in his voice, only procedure. That calm tone gave me more comfort than any emotional apology could. It reminded me that there were systems outside my family that would respect facts even when feelings tried to cover them. Back at the cafe, Rita spread a flyer on the table in front of me. It was for the community center hall next door. The flyer announced a small business and community appreciation night. There would be local food, a short program, and a few awards for people who had supported the neighborhood through hard years. At the bottom of the page, in smaller print, was a list of names. Mine was there next to the cafe and the strip mall. I had known the event was coming, but seeing my name written out in ink next to the word appreciation made me pause. Rita said that the organizer wanted me there, that they planned to mention how the block had survived during rough periods because of steady hands like mine. I ran a finger lightly over the paper. This hall, with its scuffed floor and folding chairs, was not glamorous. To people like Chloe and Dylan, it would look small. To me, it was a room where the truth of my life lived more openly. I told Rita I would attend. She grinned and said that she had already told them I would not miss it. Then she asked if I planned to invite my family. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep this side of my life separate, a quiet shelter. Another part thought about Noah's face when he asked if I ever had my own place. I said that I would at least tell them about it. If they came, they would see me through other eyes for once. If they did not, the night would still be real. The days rolled forward. The Sunday dinner came nearer on the calendar, and so did the community night. I did not rush toward either. I kept working at the cafe, walking through the strip mall, checking pipes and lights, talking to tenants about their worries. At night in the loft, I sometimes stared at the ceiling and wondered if I was being too hard. Then I would remember Chloe's words at the table, The way Dylan talked on his videos, the way Noah repeated things he heard, and the feeling of the plastic grocery bag cutting into my hand as I left that house. I would sit up, look at the notebook on the table, and remind myself that I had not decided to hurt them. I had decided to stop letting them hurt me while using my work as their cushion. On the Sunday of the family dinner, I got ready slowly. I put on clean jeans and a plain shirt, nothing fancy. I packed a small dessert from the cafe into a bag, something Noah liked. Before I left, I took one last look around the loft. The bed was made, the table clear except for my notebook and a small stack of envelopes Janet had given me to keep. I did not open them. I did not need to see the details again to know they existed. I slid one envelope into a folder and placed it in the small cabinet by the door. The room felt steady, like a dock I could return to after rough water. I took the bus back to the suburb and walked the familiar route to my daughter's house. The same manicured lawns and neat driveways lined the street. When I reached the front steps, I stopped and took a breath. I reminded myself that I was not walking into that house as a man begging for space. I was walking in as someone who had his own address, his own key to another door, and a life that did not begin and end with their approval. I rang the bell and waited. Noah opened the door with a loud greeting and threw his arms around me. Behind him, Chloe stood in the hallway, looking nervous. Dinner that night was quieter than the last one. There were no work friends, no gym buddies, just the four of us. Chloe had tried to make things look warm, candles on the table and soft music in the background. She apologized again for how she had spoken the last time we all sat there together. I told her calmly that I heard the apology, but that words did not erase everything. I said that I was living in my own place now, that I was fine, and that we could rebuild some things slowly if we respected each other. Dylan talked excitedly about a potential partnership for his app, about meetings with bigger players, about how close he was to the next level. He acted as if the subject of me had been closed with the apology, as if the old order had only been shaken, not changed. At one point, he mentioned that the bank was excited about his growth and that he was thinking ahead to maybe upgrading the house someday. He spoke as if all the support in his life came from his own hustle. I listened without commenting on the bank meetings I had just had. Near the end of the meal, Noah asked out loud when he could come visit my place. Chloe looked at me, surprised, and asked softly if I was staying with a friend. I told her that I had gone back to my old loft above the cafe and that I still worked with Rita running the strip of stores. I said it simply, as a fact. There was a brief silence at the table as that image landed in her mind. Chloe asked how often I was there, and I told her that I was there full-time now. I added that the cafe community was having a small business and community appreciation night soon at the Center Hall, and that they were planning to say a few words about my years on that side of town. I said that I would be there with some neighbors, and that Noah was welcome to come if she was comfortable with it. I did not push. I did not describe it as a big event. I just laid the information on the table next to the salt and pepper. Dylan shrugged and said that small local events were nice. He said he was busy working on a big online launch, but that they might stop by if they found time. His tone made it clear that, in his mind, anything offline and local was a little less important. Chloe, however, looked more thoughtful. She asked the date and time. I repeated it. I saw a small flicker in her eyes, the old memory of us in that neighborhood when she was a child. She said that she would check her schedule and let me know. After dinner, when I stood up to leave, Noah clung to my waist again and asked if he could come see the cafe soon. I told him we would make it happen. Chloe walked me to the door and said, in a quieter voice, that she did not realize I still had that place, that she had thought I had given it up completely when I moved in with them. I told her that I had stepped away to help her, but that the place had always been there. I did not mention deeds or bank files. I just said that sometimes what looks small from far away is what actually keeps everything standing. She nodded slowly, as if the sentence carried more than one meaning. Back in my loft that night, I looked at the calendar on my phone. 2 dates sat close together, the Sunday dinner just passed and the community night coming up. One was a table where my name had been used like a weight. The other would be a room where it was printed on a program as a support. I decided that I would not bring any confrontations to the community event. I would just stand in the light that had always been there and let anyone who came see it or not see it on their own. On the evening of the community night, I dressed in my best clean shirt and sturdy shoes. I walked with Rita to the hall next door, carrying nothing more dramatic than my phone and my wallet. The hallway smelled like old wood and fresh food. Long tables were set up with dishes from local businesses. I saw Mrs. Patel carrying a tray of samosas, the barber chatting with a group near the entrance, tenants from the strip mall waving me over. I greeted them one by one, feeling their hands on my shoulders and hearing them thank me for things I had almost forgotten I had done. As we moved further into the hall, I glanced toward the door out of habit. For a moment, I thought the evening would stay only in this circle, with no bridge to my family. Then I saw Chloe standing near the entrance, holding Noah's hand. Dylan stood behind them, scanning the room with an uncertain expression, as if he had stepped into a language he did not speak. They had come. My phone buzzed in my pocket at the same time, a calendar reminder flashing across the screen with the event name and a note about a short program starting soon. I silenced it, took a breath, and walked toward the front where chairs were lined up and a small podium waited under a simple microphone, knowing that all the pieces I had put in place were about to stand in the same room at last. The program started with simple speeches about the neighborhood, nothing fancy, just honest words. I sat in the second row with Rita on one side and Noah on the other, his small hand resting on my arm. Chloe and Dylan stood near the back wall, close enough to see everything, but far enough to pretend they were only observers. The organizer talked about how the block had survived during hard years and mentioned the businesses that kept people employed and lights on. Then she said they wanted to recognize one person whose steady work and quiet support had made a difference. She read my name and asked me to come up. I walked to the podium, feeling dozens of eyes on me, but the weight on my shoulders felt different now. The organizer handed me a simple plaque with my name and the cafe printed on it. She said that I co-owned the property and had helped keep rent fair, helped tenants stay open, helped fund small repairs out of my own pocket when times were bad. She thanked me for giving people a place to stand. I heard a small sound from the back, like a breath catching. When it was my turn to speak, I did not talk long. I thanked the community for trusting me, for letting me be part of this block. I said that I had spent my life fixing things that carried other people, and that this strip of stores was one of those things. I added calmly that I had recently updated my affairs so that when I was gone, most of what I owned here would go directly to my grandson and to funds that supported businesses which respected the people behind them. I stepped down from the podium, plaque in my hand, and walked back toward my seat. Noah reached up and squeezed my fingers. Behind him, in the crowded hall, I watched my daughter stare at the stage with wide eyes while her husband stood beside her, silent, his mouth half open like a man who has just realized the floor under him was never his alone.